You'll never be a real man again, Daniel. You're nothing but dead weight. Those were the last words Rebecca Cole spat at her crippled husband before turning her back on him and walking into the arms of his best friend, her smile dripping with triumph. What she didn't know was that Daniel's silence that night wasn't weakness, it was the first move in a transformation that would leave her begging on her knees 3 years later. What happened next will challenge everything you think you know about betrayal, strength, and revenge. Viewers, have you ever had someone underestimate you so completely that their betrayal became the very fire that remade you? How did you rise from it? Share your story in the comments. After 10 years of marriage, he gave her everything. Loyalty. Sacrifice. Even his strength, until an accident left him crippled. And how did his wife repay him? With betrayal. One stormy night, he walked away quietly, leaving behind the woman who mocked his weakness. But 3 years later, that same woman came crawling back, begging for the man she once threw away. What happened in those 3 years will shock you, and make you question everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and revenge. The night was quiet, but inside the small suburban home, tension crackled like a storm ready to break. Rain tapped against the window, but it wasn't loud enough to drown out the sound of laughter, the kind that sliced deeper than any blade. Daniel Whitmore, leaning on his crutches, froze in the hallway. His legs, weakened since the accident at the factory years ago, trembled under his weight. He had come to surprise his wife with her favorite tea, chamomile, just the way she liked it. But the sight before him made the mug slip from his hand, shattering on the tile like his heart. There she was, Rebecca, his wife of 10 years. Her arm was draped around another man. And not just any man, Jason, his so-called friend. They sat close on the couch, whispering, her laughter echoing like a cruel melody. "You deserve better than him," Jason murmured, brushing Rebecca's hair back. Rebecca smirked, eyes gleaming with venom. "Better? Jason, I've already got better. Daniel is a crippled man. He'll never be a husband again, not really. He's nothing more than dead weight." Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but his voice died inside him. Every word she said pressed against him like a stone crushing his chest. He leaned harder on his crutch, steadying himself, forcing back tears. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken. Jason chuckled, low and mocking. If he had any pride left, he would just leave. Rebecca's laughter followed, crueler this time. "Oh, he won't. He's too weak." But in that moment, something in Daniel shifted. His silence wasn't weakness, it was resolve hardening. Without a word, he turned. The crutch clicked against the wooden floor, steady and slow. He walked toward the door, his shadow stretching across the wall. Rebecca noticed the sound and glanced up. Her smirk faltered when she saw him standing there, his face pale but his eyes burning with something she hadn't seen in years, determination. For a second, she opened her mouth, maybe to justify, maybe to insult, but Daniel didn't give her the chance. He pulled the wedding ring from his finger and placed it on the table. The metal clinked softly, but the sound rang louder than any thunder. His hand shook, but his back remained straight. Without a word, he opened the door. Rain blew inside, cold and bitter, but Daniel stepped into it without hesitation. Rebecca's voice followed, sharp and panicked now, "Daniel. Where are you going?" He didn't answer. The night swallowed his figure as he disappeared into the storm, his crutches dragging against the pavement. Inside, Jason frowned. "Let him go. He won't survive without you." Rebecca forced a laugh, though her voice cracked. "Exactly. He'll come crawling back." But outside, Daniel whispered to himself, his jaw set tight. "I may be broken, but I will not be weak. Not anymore." The storm raged around him, but for the first time in years, Daniel felt free. Morning sunlight spilled into the Whitmore living room, illuminating the expensive new drapes Rebecca had chosen. She stood in front of a mirror, lipstick in hand, humming as if nothing had happened the night before. The wedding ring Daniel left behind glimmered on the table, but she ignored it like a forgotten coin. Jason, shirt half-buttoned, stretched lazily on the couch. "You're glowing," he said with a grin. Rebecca smirked, adjusting her pearl earrings. "Of course I am. For the first time in 10 years, I'm free. No more dragging around dead weight. Daniel was a burden I carried out of pity. Now I can finally live." Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, as though convincing herself as much as Jason. She took his arm and strutted out into the neighborhood. Heads turned as they passed, whispers following in their wake. Some neighbors forced polite smiles, others exchanged looks heavy with judgment. "Isn't that her husband's friend?" one old woman muttered to another. Rebecca lifted her chin higher, pretending not to hear. Pride was her armor. Gossip couldn't touch her, or so she thought. That afternoon, Rebecca threw a lavish party. Music pounded, glasses clinked, and laughter echoed through the house. She flaunted Jason proudly, introducing him as if he had been her true husband all along. "This is the man who knows my worth," she declared to her guests, her voice rising above the chatter. "Not like Daniel, who, well, you all know." Laughter rippled, shallow and forced, but it fed her ego. Yet in quiet corners, murmurs grew. She tossed her crippled husband aside for his friend, someone whispered. "Heartless." A younger neighbor asked softly, "Where's Daniel now?" Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she drowned the question with another glass of wine. Later that night, after the guests left and the music died, Rebecca sat alone on the sofa. The house felt emptier than before, despite Jason dozing upstairs. The silence pressed against her ears. Her eyes drifted to the table where Daniel's ring had once been. The surface looked bare, cold. She shook her head violently, pushing away the strange ache rising in her chest. Jason came downstairs, rubbing his eyes. "Why are you brooding? You got what you wanted." "I'm not brooding," Rebecca snapped. "I'm celebrating." She forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. Jason raised a brow. "Then celebrate quietly. I've got an early meeting tomorrow." He kissed her cheek half-heartedly and walked back upstairs, leaving her alone in the vast living room. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner, each second louder than the last. Rebecca stared at her reflection in the black TV screen, lipstick smudged, eyes tired. For the first time, a thought crept in like an unwelcome guest: what if I miscalculated? But pride smothered doubt. She poured another glass of wine, whispering to herself, "Daniel was nothing. I'm better off." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the silence of the night felt heavier than any storm. The rain-soaked night carried Daniel farther than his strength should have allowed. By dawn, his crutches sank into the mud outside a rundown boarding house on the edge of town. The landlord, a tired man with kind eyes, hesitated when he saw Daniel's limp. "You sure you can manage stairs?" he asked, doubtful. Daniel swallowed his pride. "If I can't, I'll learn." The room he rented was small, peeling wallpaper, a creaky bed, and a cracked window that let in the cold. Still, it was his. For the first time in a decade, he closed a door behind him that didn't echo with Rebecca's disdain. But freedom came at a cost. Days blurred together. Daniel woke early, pain screaming through his legs as he forced himself upright. He tried small jobs, fixing appliances, bookkeeping, but most employers looked at his crutches and shook their heads before he could finish his pitch. At night, he ate stale bread and beans, staring at the wedding photo he had taken with him. Rebecca's smile in that frame mocked him now, her hand resting on his shoulder as if she had ever supported him. His grip tightened until the glass cracked, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. One evening, after a day of rejection, he collapsed on the floor. The crutches lay beside him, useless sticks of wood. His chest heaved as tears streamed silently down his face. For a moment, the cruel words replayed, "He's nothing but dead weight." Daniel pounded the floor weakly. "Am I really nothing?" The silence answered. But then, something inside him hardened. Slowly, painfully, he dragged himself back up, clutching the edge of the bed until he stood again. His legs shook violently, but he forced himself to stay upright. "No," he whispered through gritted teeth. "I won't be her joke. Not forever." From that night, Daniel's resolve sharpened. He spent mornings at the library, crutches thumping between the aisles, devouring books about business, finance, and online trade. Afternoons, he took small freelance jobs he could do from his room, data entry, customer calls, anything to keep his mind sharp and his spirit afloat. It wasn't glamorous, but every coin he earned was a victory. Each rejection became fuel. The landlord's wife often slipped extra bread into his meals. "You're tougher than you look, son," she said kindly. Daniel only nodded, though inside, her words planted hope. At night, while others slept, he pushed through the pain of his therapy exercises. His legs screamed, sweat drenched his shirt, but he kept going. Every stretch, every stumble was a rebellion against Rebecca's curse. On his nightstand, he replaced the broken wedding photo with a blank notebook. The first page bore only 4 words, scribbled in his rough handwriting. "Rise. No matter what." The room was still small, the food still plain. But inside Daniel, something unstoppable had begun to grow. 3 months had passed since Daniel vanished into the storm. For Rebecca, those months had been a whirlwind of wine, parties, and shopping sprees. On the surface, she sparkled brighter than ever. But behind closed doors, cracks had begun to spread like fractures in glass. It started with Jason. One morning, she found him at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone with a grin that wasn't meant for her. "Who are you texting?" she asked casually, pouring herself coffee. Jason smirked. "Relax, Beck. You're too jealous. Enjoy your coffee." Her jaw tightened. She tried to brush it off, telling herself she was imagining things. But the late-night calls, the perfume lingering on his shirt, the way he stayed out longer each evening, none of it could be ignored. Still, Rebecca plastered on a smile in public. At a dinner party, she raised her glass high. "To Jason," she declared, "the man who gave me a new life." The guests clinked glasses, but their eyes told another story. Whispers circled, wasn't he Daniel's friend? Didn't she leave her husband for him? The words stung, but she drowned them in champagne. Pride was her shield. Yet pride couldn't pay bills. Jason's business ventures weren't as successful as he bragged. The rent came late, debt stacked high, and creditors began calling. Rebecca sold off jewelry she once flaunted, insisting it was just to upgrade later. But in truth, the money was slipping through her fingers like sand. One evening, she confronted Jason. "We're running low. What's your plan?" He leaned back, lighting a cigarette. "Don't worry about it. You've always had a taste for luxury, Rebecca. Maybe it's time you adjust your standards." The words sliced deeper than he knew. She had left Daniel for this, for a man who now treated her like an inconvenience. Rebecca stormed upstairs, slamming the door. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the flawless makeup, the designer dress. But behind the mask, her eyes looked tired, older. Loneliness pressed against her chest like a vice. That night, she dreamed of Daniel. She saw him standing in the rain, eyes burning with something she hadn't recognized back then. In the dream, he didn't beg her to stay. He simply walked away, and for the first time, Rebecca felt a pang of regret so sharp it woke her. The next morning, while folding laundry, she overheard 2 neighbors outside. "Poor Daniel," one said softly. "He gave her everything, and she threw him away." "Yes," the other replied, "but maybe it's a blessing. I hear he's trying to rebuild." Strong man, that one. Rebecca froze, the shirt in her hands trembling. Strong. Rebuilding? She forced a laugh, though no one could hear it. He's nothing without me, she told herself. He can't be. But deep down, unease crept in. For the first time since he walked away, she wondered if Daniel's silence had been more powerful than her scorn. Daniel's days had become a blur of discipline. Pain was a constant companion, but so was determination. Every morning, he dragged his aching legs out of bed and pushed through his exercises. His arms grew stronger, his frame leaner, his eyes sharper. Still, money was thin, and the world rarely gave chances to broken men. That is, until one afternoon at the public library. Daniel sat hunched over a dusty computer, scrolling through business forums. He had been teaching himself everything from online trading to small-scale e-commerce. His notes filled an entire notebook, pages of figures and strategies. A voice interrupted him. "You've been here every day for weeks," said an older gentleman with silver hair and a tailored suit. He set his own stack of books down. "What are you studying so intently?" Daniel hesitated. "Business. Finance. Anything I can get my hands on." The man studied him for a moment. "And why?" Daniel straightened, his voice steady. "Because I refuse to stay broken. My body may be weak, but my mind isn't. I'll find a way to build something of my own." The man's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good answer. Name's Charles Morton. I run a logistics firm. Maybe you can put that mind of yours to use." That meeting changed everything. Charles gave Daniel his first real opportunity, handling online accounts for a small branch of the company. The work was tedious at first, spreadsheets, inventory tracking, but Daniel threw himself into it with precision. Within weeks, Charles noticed. "You've got a knack for strategy," Charles said one evening. "Ever thought about consulting?" Daniel shook his head. Who would take advice from a crippled man? Charles leaned closer, eyes firm. "Anyone who cares about results. Don't let that word define you." Encouraged, Daniel expanded. He began freelancing for startups, helping streamline their budgets, marketing, and logistics. Slowly, payments trickled in. Then grew. Within a year, he had built a network of clients who trusted him, not out of pity, but respect. At night, he no longer stared at Rebecca's photo. Instead, he wrote in his notebook. This time, the pages weren't filled with dreams, they were filled with numbers, projections, profits. And there was something else. His therapy exercises bore fruit. His steps were still heavy, aided by polished new crutches, but his gait was steadier. Each walk down the street felt less like survival and more like victory. Children in the neighborhood even began calling him Mr. Whitmore the Fighter. One evening, standing on a hill overlooking the city lights, Daniel whispered to himself. "She said I was nothing, but look at me now. This is just the beginning." The wind carried his words, but deep down, he knew, his turning point wasn't just survival. It was the start of a future so bright Rebecca wouldn't recognize the man she threw away. 3 years passed. The city had changed. New high-rises, bustling markets, sleek cars replacing old jalopies, but none of it compared to how Daniel Whitmore had changed. On a warm spring evening, the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel glittered with chandeliers. A charity gala was underway, attended by business leaders, politicians, and socialites. Rebecca arrived clinging to Jason's arm, though their smiles looked painted on. Their finances had collapsed, yet appearances had to be maintained. As she sipped champagne, Rebecca whispered sharply, "Smile. People are watching." Jason rolled his eyes, already scanning the room for other women. Then, a hush rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward the entrance. The doorman announced, "Mr. Daniel Whitmore." Rebecca's glass froze midair. The man who stepped through the doorway barely resembled the broken husband she once mocked. He wore a tailored navy suit that fit his frame like it was crafted for him alone. His shoulders were broad, his posture upright, his polished crutches gleaming like silver in the ballroom lights. He didn't hobble, he moved with quiet authority, each step deliberate, commanding. Gasps echoed. A banker whispered, "That's Whitmore. He's the man behind Morton Logistics turnaround. Built his own consultancy too. Brilliant strategist." Rebecca's ears rang. Morton Logistics. Consultancy. The words tangled in her mind. Daniel greeted Charles Morton with a firm handshake, his calm smile radiating confidence. Cameras flashed as journalists hurried to capture photos of the man whose name had become synonymous with resilience. Jason leaned toward Rebecca, his voice low. "Wait, isn't that?" Rebecca cut him off, her voice barely audible. "It can't be." But her trembling hand betrayed her. Daniel's gaze eventually swept across the room, landing on them. For a moment, time stopped. Rebecca's heart pounded. She expected rage, bitterness, but his eyes carried none of that. Instead, they held something worse, indifference. He walked past them, acknowledging their presence with nothing more than a nod. That simple gesture, cool, detached, shattered her pride more than any insult could. Throughout the evening, Daniel moved like a man who belonged. Investors sought him out, reporters scribbled his words, leaders laughed at his subtle wit. The ballroom pulsed with admiration for him. Rebecca, once the center of attention, now sat invisible in the corner. She gripped Jason's arm, but he had drifted toward the bar, uninterested. Finally, unable to contain herself, Rebecca rose. Her heels clicked across the marble floor as she approached Daniel. Her voice quivered, but desperation steadied it. "Daniel." He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Rebecca swallowed hard, her pride cracking with every word. I made a mistake." A hush fell again. Eyes darted between them, this was the confrontation no one expected. Daniel tilted his head slightly, his silence as sharp as a blade. Rebecca's voice broke. "Please, take me back." The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's face remained calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet fire. For the first time in years, it was Rebecca who was begging. The ballroom air thickened with silence. Forks paused midair, champagne flutes trembled in hands, and all eyes locked onto the scene unfolding at the center. Rebecca Whitmore, once elegant, untouchable, and proud, stood trembling before the man she had thrown away. "Daniel," she whispered again, her voice raw. The name slipped from her lips like a prayer, as if speaking it could erase the years, erase her betrayal. Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and piercing. He didn't move, didn't flinch. His stillness was louder than any scream. Rebecca's throat tightened. Her hands twisted nervously in front of her. I was wrong. I was blind. Jason, he lied to me. He promised me a life, but he ruined everything. I should have stood by you. Please, Daniel. Please, forgive me. Take me back." Gasps swept through the crowd. The woman who had once mocked her crippled husband was now begging, her words echoing through the gilded hall. Jason, leaning on the bar, smirked bitterly. "Unbelievable," he muttered. He didn't step forward to defend her. Didn't care if she grovelled. Rebecca reached out, her fingers trembling inches from Daniel's arm. "You were a good man. Better than I ever deserved. I was foolish, selfish. I see that now. Just, give me another chance. We can start over." Her knees buckled slightly, and she clutched at the hem of his suit, clinging like a drowning woman to a lifeline. The room erupted in whispers. Is that his ex-wife? She's begging him. How the tables have turned. But Daniel remained silent. His eyes were calm, his jaw set firm. Rebecca's tears smeared her makeup, leaving dark trails down her face. Her voice rose, breaking under the weight of desperation. "Don't you see? I need you, Daniel. I was wrong, but I can change, I can be better. Just don't leave me like this. Not again." Still, no answer. The tension built until even the chandeliers seemed to hum with anticipation. Daniel's silence wasn't cruelty, it was justice. Every second he withheld words was a mirror reflecting back the pain she had once caused him. Finally, he leaned slightly closer, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "When I needed love, you gave me betrayal." His words were steady, measured, almost gentle. But each syllable landed like a hammer. Rebecca froze. Daniel straightened, his polished crutches gleaming under the ballroom lights. "Now you need help. But I have none left to give you." Her lips parted in shock, a sob catching in her throat. She collapsed back onto her heels, clutching her face. Around them, the murmurs turned to pity, not for him, but for her. For the first time, Rebecca understood the depth of what she had lost. Not just a husband, but a man who had become more than she ever believed he could. And now, he was untouchable. Daniel turned away, leaving her kneeling in a puddle of her own shame. The ballroom erupted in hushed awe. The crowd barely breathed. Rebecca knelt on the polished marble floor, mascara streaking her cheeks, clutching the hem of Daniel's suit as though it were her last hope. The woman who once paraded her freedom like a crown now looked small, broken, desperate. "Daniel," she whispered hoarsely, "don't turn your back on me. Please, don't do to me what I did to you." Her voice cracked on the last word. The irony of her plea wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Daniel paused, the weight of her words lingering in the air. Slowly, he lowered his gaze to her. His expression was not one of anger, nor triumph, it was something deeper. Pity. He spoke quietly, but the ballroom was so silent that every word carried. "I begged you once, Rebecca. 10 years of my life, I gave you everything I had. And when I needed you most, you laughed. You mocked me. Do you remember?" Rebecca shook her head wildly, tears spilling. "I was foolish. I was cruel. But I can change." Daniel raised a hand, silencing her. His voice was firmer now, ringing through the hall. "Change? No. You didn't betray me by accident. You chose. You chose Jason. You chose pride. You chose to treat me as less than a man." Jason, still at the bar, smirked into his glass, not even bothering to intervene. That sting cut Rebecca deeper than any insult Daniel could offer. "You said I'd never survive without you," Daniel continued. He took a step forward, his polished crutches clicking like a metronome of justice. "But look at me now, Rebecca. Look." She lifted her face, her sobs ragged. The man before her wasn't the broken husband she discarded, he was taller somehow, stronger, carrying himself with dignity no wealth could buy. The whispers around them echoed her realization, he had risen without her. Rebecca's hands slipped from his suit. She fell back against the floor, shaking her head as if denial could turn back time. "Please. Daniel, don't leave me like this. Don't humiliate me. I'll do anything." Daniel inhaled deeply, his jaw tightening. For a brief moment, sorrow flickered in his eyes, sorrow for the 10 wasted years. Then he exhaled, and with it, released her from his life. "I don't need your apologies," he said evenly. "What I needed was your loyalty. And that, Rebecca, you already gave away." A sharp gasp broke from the crowd. Daniel turned, his suit catching the light, his every movement radiating strength. Without another word, he walked away, the sound of his crutches echoing like thunder through the hall. Rebecca reached out weakly, but her hand grasped only air. She collapsed into sobs, the stares of the wealthy and powerful burning into her. Pride was gone, reputation shattered, she was nothing but the woman who threw away a man she thought was weak. And now the whole world saw her regret. The ballroom doors closed behind Daniel, the echo of his crutches fading down the marble corridor. Outside, the night air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of city traffic. He paused at the bottom of the grand staircase, drawing in a slow, steady breath. The confrontation was over. The ghosts of the past no longer chained him. A soft voice called out. "Daniel?" He turned, and there she was, Clara Hayes. The woman who had been by his side during the climb from nothing. Clara was elegant, her dress simple but radiant under the streetlights. She wasn't part of the wealthy elite gathered upstairs, yet her presence outshone them all. She smiled gently, eyes brimming with quiet pride. "I saw what happened in there. Are you all right?" Daniel's stern expression softened. "I'm more than all right. For the first time in years. I feel free." Clara slipped her hand into his. "You deserve this, Daniel. Everything you've built, it's yours. Not borrowed, not given. Yours." The way she said it carried weight. She had seen him at his lowest, failing therapy sessions, sleepless nights at the computer, the rejection letters piling up. She had cooked meals when he couldn't stand, read business articles aloud when his eyes blurred with exhaustion, encouraged him when no one else believed. Now, the world saw him as a success. But Clara had seen the man behind the success. A chauffeur approached, holding open the door of a sleek black car with tinted windows. Daniel guided Clara inside, his movement steady, practiced. When the door shut, the world outside dimmed, leaving them cocooned in quiet. Through the window, Daniel caught a glimpse of Rebecca emerging from the ballroom. She stumbled into the night, mascara streaked, clutching her purse as Jason walked away without a backward glance. She called after him, but he waved her off, disappearing into the crowd. Alone. That was her punishment. Rebecca's eyes flicked toward the car just as it pulled away. For a fleeting second, her gaze locked with Daniel's through the glass. She saw the life she had mocked, a crippled husband, weak and useless. Transformed into a man of power, respect, and love. Her lips trembled as she mouthed his name, but the car rolled forward, carrying him into a future she could no longer touch. Inside, Clara rested her head lightly on Daniel's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it? Walking away?" Daniel's hand tightened gently around hers. "No," he said, his voice calm, resolute. "What I regret is wasting so many years on someone who never saw me. But that's behind me now." Clara smiled. "Good. Because what's ahead looks brighter than anything you left behind." Daniel glanced out at the city skyline glowing against the night. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, not broken, not weak, but whole. And this time, he was not walking into the storm alone. Rebecca sat slumped on the cold hotel steps, her designer gown wrinkled, her makeup ruined by tears. The laughter and music of the gala echoed faintly behind her, mocking her isolation. Jason was gone, the last man she thought would stand by her. She clutched her purse like a lifeline, but it held nothing but bills and broken pride. In her mind, Daniel's words replayed like a cruel hymn, "When I needed love, you gave me betrayal. Now you need help, but I have none left to give you." For the first time in her life, Rebecca understood what it meant to be powerless. The woman who once believed herself untouchable had been reduced to a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel's car pulled into a quiet neighborhood. He stepped out slowly, Clara at his side. Children from the block ran up to greet him. "Mr. Whitmore." "Mr. Whitmore," they called, tugging at his hands. He bent slightly, steadying himself on his crutches, and handed out small wrapped gifts. Donations for the local youth center he funded. One boy looked up at him with wide eyes. "Sir, how did you get so strong?" when you were hurt. Daniel smiled softly, his gaze warm. Because strength doesn't come from what you have, it comes from what you refuse to give up. The boy nodded, holding on to those words like treasure. Clara's eyes shimmered with pride as she watched Daniel speaking life into others, turning his pain into purpose. Inside their modest but warm home, Daniel placed his crutches by the door. He didn't see them as chains anymore, they were symbols of every step he had fought to take. Clara set dinner on the table, her laughter filling the room. Daniel sat down, looking at her, and for the first time in years, felt peace settle deep within him. Back at the hotel, Rebecca scrolled through her phone, searching for Daniel's name. Headlines lit up her screen. From broken to brilliant, the rise of Daniel Whitmore. Resilience turned fortune. The man who refused to break. Photo after photo showed him smiling, confident, loved. And in none of them was she by his side. The realization hit like a final blow, she hadn't just lost a husband. She had lost the chance to be part of a legacy. Rebecca buried her face in her hands, sobbing. The night swallowed her cries, but the lesson was clear, betrayal had cost her everything. Across the city, Daniel lifted his glass at dinner, his voice steady, his eyes shining. To new beginnings, he said. Clara clinked her glass with his, her smile radiant. The screen faded to black with a final narration. Never mock someone's weakness. It may be the seed of their strength. And never betray loyalty, because when love turns to silence, that silence can become the loudest revenge.